The chapel bell. I moved to Trin An village in late July when the air was still stifling and the cicadas screamed like they were trying to keep everyone from sleeping. My mother had passed away earlier that year in a traffic accident, and my father had since remarried, so I chose to live with my grandmother, the only remaining family member who didn't make me feel like a stranger. Trin An was a small village, tucked between three hills covered with tall bamboo and aging melaleuca trees. At the village center were a makeshift market, a small clinic, an elementary school, and one very old chapel, abandoned. I remember my first day there. My grandmother warned me, "Go where you like, but don't go near the chapel, especially if you hear the bell." I asked her, "What bell?" "The chapel's abandoned." She stared at me for a long moment and simply said, "Bells don't need people to ring them, child." I thought she was just superstitious. The chapel was built during the French colonial era, gray stone covered in moss, its front doors long since collapsed, the roof sagging as if ready to fall. But it was true. On my first night in Trin An, I heard the bell. At exactly 1:13 a.m. It wasn't loud or frantic, just a single echoing bong, distant and low, like it had risen up from beneath the earth. The dogs in the village began howling, not barking, howling like wolves. My grandmother sat bolt upright on her wooden cot, her eyes wide, staring at the window. She whispered, "It's tolling again." A chill slid down my spine. The next day, I asked around the village. No one wanted to talk. An old man selling tea quietly muttered, "Back then, every time someone heard the bell, someone disappeared." I laughed, assuming it was just another spooky folktale meant to scare kids. But then things started going far beyond anything I knew. On the seventh day, I met Anne, a girl about my age, near the edge of the village by the hill path. She said she was only visiting for a while, and she, too, had heard the bell. I've heard it twice now, but no one believes me. Everyone avoids the chapel, but they won't say why. They're scared. We became friends quickly. That evening, I told her about the bell I'd heard at 1:13. She looked at me, her face pale. "If you've heard it once, it's okay, but if you've heard it a second time..." "What then?" "Then on the third night, it'll knock on your door." I laughed nervously, trying to shrug off Anne's words, but she didn't smile. She kept her eyes fixed on mine, as if trying to make sure I understood this wasn't some silly village superstition. "Has it ever knocked on yours?" I asked. She paused, her voice lowered. "No, I never stayed long enough." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the window, half expecting to see someone or something, standing outside in the dark. The village was dead silent after 10 p.m., and the air felt heavier than usual. Even the cicadas seemed to have vanished. At exactly 1:13 a.m., the bell tolled again, but this time it was closer, louder. The vibration ran down the wooden walls, the window pane shook slightly, and somewhere down the hill, I thought I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, crunching over dry grass. I didn't move. I held my breath. No knock came, not that night. I told Anne about it the next morning. She looked worried. "You heard it again? Then the next time won't be a bell. It'll knock." I wanted to laugh again. I really did, but her face was too serious, too sincere. So instead, I asked the question I shouldn't have asked. "What happens after the knock?" She was silent for a long time. Then finally, "They say if you open the door, you'll see someone you know, someone who's already dead. And if I don't open it, it comes in anyway." By now, I was starting to feel the toll, sleep-deprived, paranoid. But not crazy. The bell wasn't a dream. The dogs howled. The clock always read 1:13. And then there were the other signs. Dead birds. Every morning after the bell tolled, I'd see one or two birds, black, small, necks twisted unnaturally, lying on the path leading to the chapel, always facing the same direction, toward my window. Even my grandmother began to act strange. She stopped cooking, sat by the altar for hours, muttering prayers in a language I didn't recognize. She wouldn't let me leave the house after sunset, wouldn't let me speak the name of the chapel out loud. "It listens," she told me once. "What listens?" She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed very, very old. The one they used to pray to there. On the 12th night, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the house. I had to see the chapel for myself. It sat at the edge of the village, just beyond the overgrown path, behind a crumbling stone wall. The air was colder there. The trees stopped growing near it, and the grass looked gray in the moonlight. It felt wrong, like the ground itself was trying to tell me to turn back. But I stepped through the gate. The chapel had no door, just a wide, gaping entrance, like a mouth. Inside, it was pitch dark. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The pews were rotten. The crucifix at the altar had been defaced, the figure of Christ scratched away, replaced by something else carved into the wood. A horned shape, eyes hollow, mouth open wide as if screaming. At the center of the chapel was the bell. It hung from a wooden frame, intact, ancient. No rope, but something had wrapped around its base, like long, thin strands of hair. I reached for my phone to take a picture. The screen went black. Then I heard it. Not the bell. Not the dogs. A breath right beside my ear. I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted the entire way home, stumbling through brush and mud, heart pounding against my ribs. When I got to the house, my grandmother was waiting at the door. She didn't scold me, didn't ask where I'd been. She only said, "You brought it back." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room, staring at the door. The time crept closer and closer to 1:13. I don't know how I knew, but I did. This was the third time. 1:12. The second hand ticked. 13. No bell, just silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. 3 soft knocks. Not forceful, not aggressive, almost polite, but they weren't from the front door. They came from the closet. I froze. The room was freezing. My breath misted in the air. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up slowly, eyes fixed on the closet door. My hand reached toward the knob before I even realized what I was doing. Then I heard it, a voice faint from behind the door. "It's me. It's Mom." I stopped. My fingers trembled on the doorknob. She sounded just like my mother. Gentle, kind. "I've missed you, sweetheart. Please, let me in." A part of me wanted to believe, needed to, but something was wrong. My mother had died in a car crash. Her skull was fractured. She couldn't have sounded so clear, so whole. I backed away. The voice changed, no longer soft, no longer kind. "Let me in." The door burst open, but nothing was there. Only the dark, and a single strand of long black hair on the floor. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I told Anne everything. The voice, the closet, the strand of hair. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "That means it's chosen you." For what? I don't know, but once it knocks, it doesn't stop. She insisted we go to the chapel again, this time during the day. I didn't want to, but part of me knew we had to end it somehow. Maybe destroy the bell. Maybe find whatever cursed thing was hiding inside. At noon, we walked the overgrown trail. The chapel stood in its usual rot and silence, but in daylight, it felt asleep and led the way. She held a box of matches and a bottle of lighter fluid in her backpack. "We burn the bell," she said. "Metal doesn't burn, but the hair will. The altar, too. It's where they sealed it." "Sealed what?" She didn't answer. Inside the chapel, it was colder than it should have been. The carved horned figure on the altar seemed clearer than before. Less like something worn by time and more like something growing through the wood. The bell still hung there. But this time, it was moving, swinging slightly, not ringing, just shifting side to side like someone had just nudged it. The strands of hair wrapped around its base had multiplied. Now there were dozens, hundreds, long black strings, like someone's entire scalp had been woven into them, and poured the fluid on the base of the bell and along the altar. She lit a match. But before she could throw it, the bell rang. Once. It sounded inside our skulls, a low humming vibration that made my teeth hurt, and dropped the match. It didn't go out. It landed in the fluid. Whoosh! The altar caught fire immediately. The hair snapped and shriveled like worms. The bell screamed, not rang, screamed like metal scraping bone. Then we heard the footsteps, hundreds of them, running, scraping, dragging across the floorboards. But we were the only ones inside. The pews slammed against each other. The air turned to ash. And then we saw her. The girl from the altar, but no longer carved, no longer still. She stood at the back of the chapel, tall, soaked in ash, her face split down the middle like a cracked mask, showing nothing underneath but wet black rot. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth hung open. From it came the sound of the bell, over and over, faster and louder. Boom, boom. We ran. The flames were everywhere, but we ran through them. My skin burned and screamed as her shirt caught fire. The door collapsed behind us. The entire chapel began to sink, not collapse, not crumble. sink into the ground as if being swallowed. And just before the roof vanished below the soil, we saw her one last time, standing atop the bell, watching us, smiling. They found us half unconscious near the old well at the edge of the village. We were covered in burns and soot. No one believed our story, but the chapel was gone. Not burned, not destroyed, just gone. The ground where it stood was smooth, flat, untouched, like nothing had ever been built there, and was taken to the hospital. She never spoke again. As for me, I left Trinon the following week, but I never stopped hearing it. Even now, years later, when the world is quiet and the hour is late, I hear it. Once, at 1:13 a.m., the sound of a bell that no longer exists. And sometimes, if I don't turn on the lights fast enough, I see my mother standing in the doorway. And she's smiling, but she's not blinking.